up guys, and you know how some phones have been released in the past which have been sub $400 and have been incredibly good, such as the OnePlus 3, the ZTE Accent 7, and the 2015 Moto X. However, there have also been some phones which are sub $300 or $200, such as this guy, the 2016 reincarnation of the Samsung J5. Okay, so let's start off easy with the phone. The phone is made by obviously Samsung and is currently running Android 5.1 Lollipop. However, there have been multiple updates that have pushed to different carriers and international variants of the phone, which have allowed it to go to Android 6.0 or 6.0.1 Marshmallow. The dimensions of the phone are 145.8 by 72.3 by 8.1 millimeters, or 5.74 by 2.85 or by 2.32 inches. The phone isn't really that thick while you're holding it in your hand, and it's pretty comfortable even with a case on. And without a case, it's just pretty easy to hold. And it's nearly as thick as the Samsung Galaxy S7 Edge, which people consider pretty thin, so this phone should not be a problem for people who think that this phone is too big or too thick to fit in their pocket. The weight of this phone is 159 grams, which is approximately 5.61 ounces. It comes in 3 colors, which include rose gold, silver, and regular gold. On the right hand side of the phone is your volume physical buttons, and on the left hand side is the lock/unlock buttons. And it's also made of metal and plastic. The entire phone itself is made of plastic and metal. However, moving on to the display, it is a 5.2 inch display, which is a 720 by 1080 pixel per inch display. It has a pixel density of 282, so it won't be really winning the brightest and most compact and dense pixelated display in the world. However, 282 pixels per inch is not bad, I guess, for a sub $220 phone. It is a Super AMOLED capacitive touchscreen with 16 million colors. The screen to body ratio is around 70.7%, and it's not bad, I guess. The bezels aren't really that thick, however you might say it's kind of thick on the bottom. And the multi-touch display is supported to up to 5 fingers. Now, for most phones which have been under $400, $300, or $200, the biggest downside and disadvantage to buying a phone that cheap has been always the camera. And this phone is somewhere in the middle. It's pretty good in some scenarios and environments, however usually it'll be pretty lackluster and average. It has a 13 megapixel camera, which is f1.9 aperture, and the rear focal length is 28 millimeters. The rear video is capped out at 1080p at 30 frames per second. It has one LED flash, and the front camera has a 5 megapixels. The front aperture of the front camera is f1.9, and it obviously has the general geotagging, touch focus, and face detection. Now, the specs on the camera are all pretty good, obviously. However, as we all know, megapixels and specs on phones, especially cameras, are not always the case. This phone may have 13 megapixels, and this phone can take pretty high quality photos, such as these. However, usually the phone's camera experience is pretty lackluster. The camera app on this phone is the same camera app you'll find on most Android 6.0 Marshmallow Samsung phones, such as the Galaxy S7 and S7 Edge. Some of the photos that this phone can take is pretty nice. It has pretty good colors and can sometimes take pretty good depth of field effect photos, such as this. As you can see in the photo, it has pretty good bokeh in the back, which is unusual for a phone at this price. However, this is not always the case, and this is a rarity sometimes. So do keep that in mind when you're taking photos and looking to find a phone which can take pretty good bokeh effect photos for a cheap price below $400. Some of the images that this phone can take has pretty good saturated colors and has pretty good dynamic range. Obviously, using the HDR mode on this phone will obviously help by stitching in different photos at different exposure levels to create the best photo it can take. Now, the video that this camera can take is pretty lackluster like most sub $400 phones, except for the OnePlus 3 and ZTE Accent 7 obviously. This phone's camera can take decent videos, however, usually most of the videos that comes out of this camera is pretty jiggly, shaky, and just terrible. It sucks in low light and is alright in daylight. Even though it has a lot of light to work with in daylight, it still looks pretty soft and heavily edited in post-production, even if you don't want it to. You can easily see in this photo that the non-OIS camera damages the phone's experience when moving with the phone trying to capture video. As you can see, me walking and just walking regularly, not even that quickly, has caused this camera to easily break down in stabilizing the photos. Even the EIS, the electronic image stabilization, does not help at all. And usually it helps sometimes in most phones, which have been released this year or the years below, such as the iPhone 6s, which had no OIS, however still did pretty well because of its EIS. Now, moving to the main physical hardware and specs of this phone, its chipset is a Qualcomm MSM 8196 or AS. Now, moving on to the hardware and chipset of this phone. This phone's chip is obviously a Qualcomm MSM 8916 Snapdragon 410. Its CPU is a quad-core 1.2 GHz Cortex A53, and its GPU is a Adreno 306. It has 2 GB of RAM and its storage is only 16 GB. However, it does have an SD card slot, which storage expansion is available up to 128 GB. And it has no fingerprint sensor in the home button, so yeah, pretty sad, I guess. Now, those specs are alright, I guess. However, in real day life use, as you can see by the Geekbench score, those chipsets and GPUs and CPUs don't really seem to give it that best score and probably the best experience of any sub $300 phone. However, for most phones in this price, this does surprisingly well. It's pretty fluid and sometimes it can reach perfect 60 frames per second. However, I feel like it's capped usually at only 30 frames per second. It's pretty fluid and Android 6.0 Marshmallow definitely helps. It's perfect in web browsing and it's alright in just using basic social media such as Twitter, Facebook. However, Snapchat still sucks on Android. So yeah. Gaming on this phone is also pretty good. Even though it's not the most high quality and expensive of premium flagship products that Samsung has to offer, if you buy this phone, you can be certain that you can easily handle any of the games. As you can see, me playing racing in car, that game, yeah, it's pretty fast and fluid with no lags or slowdowns at all. And there's also no thermal throttling, which is perfect because on a phone this cheap and primarily made of plastic, it's good to know that the CPU handles gaming and more tasks like web browsing pretty easily. Now, Android 6.0 Marshmallow comes built in with this phone if you decide to buy this phone after April, which is when it was released. However, even though it's running Android 6.0 Marshmallow and has all the features that this phone has with Android 6.0 Marshmallow, you can still find Samsung's ugly and disgusting TouchWiz overlay. Not the current gen TouchWiz overlay, which is called the Grace UI that you can find on the deceased Galaxy Note 7, but this is the old school TouchWiz overlay which came with the S7 and S7 Edge and below. It's pretty ugly in some ways and it's also pretty functional in other ways. Now, speaking of Android 6.0 Marshmallow, this phone obviously comes with Doze. Not Doze on the go that comes with Android 7.0 phones such as the LG V20, but just regular Doze, which is alright. This phone's battery life has been pretty good and can get me anywhere from 3 hours of screen on time all the way up to 7. This is because that the 3100 mAh battery is paired with Doze and it's pretty terrible display, I would say. That's only 720p and it's small display also, which helps reduce the amount of battery life used. Obviously, the chipset, GPU, and all the other hardware is not as optimized and as battery efficient as the newer variations and counterparts released this year and probably next year. However, this phone still gets great battery life. Probably a B or B plus in my book. So thanks for watching my video, and if you enjoyed, make sure to leave a thumbs up down below, subscribe and comment while you're at it. And I'll see you guys tomorrow.